Dark Age humanity built a gun that erases you from existence. Not kills you, erases you, as if you never existed. And then Games Workshop did the same thing to the gun. The weapon has no official name. Games Workshop never gave it one. In the lore text where it appears, it's described only as an unnamed piece of Dark Age archeotech. Archeotech, pronounced archeotech, from a civilization so far ahead of its successors that most of what it built remained incomprehensible to anyone who came after. The community calls it the ontological weapon, after the philosophical discipline concerned with the nature of existence itself, what it means for something to exist, what makes something real rather than merely conceived, what categories of being there are, and whether those categories can be violated. The weapon doesn't destroy its target in any conventional sense. It asserts, apparently irreversibly, that the target never existed. Every memory erased, every record blank, every material trace dissolved backward through time, as if the target had never formed. Games Workshop introduced this concept into live canon, used it once, and then quietly stopped mentioning it. No official retcon, no Warhammer Legends designation, no FAQ, no designer note explaining why a weapon that erases existence from the record is no longer in the record. It simply stopped appearing. And that structural outcome, the concept introduced, then allowed to stop mattering, sits at the center of this investigation. The question isn't just what happened to the weapon, it's whether the weapon is part of a pattern. Games Workshop built one of the most richly detailed fictional universes in the history of the medium, and that universe is anchored in a lost golden age, 10,000 years of human achievement called the Age of Technology, which humanity then destroyed and promptly renamed the Dark Age of Technology, because that is the kind of civilization the 41st millennium is. The case here is that GW has repeatedly introduced specific, individuated concepts from that lost golden age into active canon, generated engagement around what those concepts implied, and then declined to follow through on any of them. The Imperium forgot what the Dark Age built. GW appears to have done something structurally similar to its own best ideas about it. The unnamed weapon is where the investigation starts. The era in question is officially called the Age of Technology in GW's primary sources. The fandom wiki's Age of Technology article is unambiguous. The Age of Technology, informally often referred to as the Dark Age of Technology, was the zenith of humanity's scientific knowledge and technological prowess. The Dark Age label is a retronym, applied after the fact by an Imperium that learned to distrust what the age produced. The irony of calling humanity's greatest achievement a Dark Age is entirely lost on the people using the term, which is itself a measure of how thoroughly the knowledge has been buried. The age spans from the 15th to approximately the 25th millennium, 10,000 years. During that span, humanity developed warp drive, engineered the navigator gene into a subset of the population to allow longer and more accurate warp jumps, colonized worlds across the entire galaxy, and built standard template construct databases containing the complete inventory of human scientific and technological knowledge so that even distant colonies could maintain a full civilization from first principles. The Lexicanum's Dark Age of Technology article, sourced across the 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 10th edition rulebooks, plus the Horus Heresy series, lists what was actually produced during the period. Archeotech pistols, graviton weapons, phase iron, Psyarchana weaponry, vortex weapons, disintegration weapons, teleportation, and void abacuses, among items individually cited in primary sources. Beyond the catalog items, the fandom wiki states that thinking machines administered to every need of human colony worlds, transforming them into what it calls utopias, while endless ranks of fearsome men of iron were created to be unleashed on any that refused to capitulate, alien and human alike. A suppressed document called the Emerald Testament, attributed to a techno-archaeologist named Sinetius Thorn, dated M29, cited in the Horus Heresy Book 7, Inferno, on page 132, frames the age's relationship to its own ending with the precision of someone who has thought carefully about the problem. It's because, finally, humanity had the arts at their disposal to make their dreams reality. And the dreams of humanity have ever been the darkest things in all creation. The document is suppressed, which is information in itself. The collapse came on multiple fronts. The Men of Iron revolted, somewhere between M23 and M25, depending on the source. The 6th edition rulebook places it M23 to M25, while the 3rd edition, Journal of Keeper Crippius, suggests M25 or M26, with the Lexicanum noting both as conflicting sources and declining to arbitrate. Warp storms began intensifying around M25 as the accumulating psychic mass of humanity's expanding psyker population heralded what would become the fall of the Eldar. The storms made interstellar travel impossible, collapsing trade networks overnight, stranding every colony in isolation, leaving high-population worlds like Terra unable to feed themselves. 5,000 years of fragmentation, barbarism, and mutual destruction followed. The Age of Strife, called Old Night by those who endured it. Then came the Emperor, then the Great Crusade, then the Horus Heresy, then the Imperium of Man, a civilization that inherited the physical remnants of the greatest human achievement in history and lacked the institutional capacity to understand most of what it had inherited. The Adeptus Mechanicus, correct term for the post-Horus Heresy organization, distinct from the pre-Heresy Mechanicum on Mars, treats an intact standard template construct fragment as a religious miracle. Graham McNeil's Mechanicum, the 9th Horus Heresy novel, places Adept Zeth in a conversation that makes the Mechanicus's fundamental problem explicit even during the heresy itself. Our grasp of such things is limited by blind adherence to dogma, tradition, and repetition. She says this in M31. By M42, the dogma has had 10,000 additional years to calcify into institutional bone. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains Dark Age machines through ritual maintenance prayers. It replicates weapon designs through template matching rather than engineering comprehension. Most DAoT technology required artificial intelligence to function at design specification. The fandom wiki states that thinking machines administered the entire colony infrastructure. The Emperor then decreed the development of artificial intelligence a capital offense. The Crimson Accords of Mars, passed in the aftermath of the Age of Strife, codified the death sentence on any remaining Silica animus, the High Gothic term meaning roughly silicon soul for an artificial self-aware machine. The Adeptus Mechanicus preserved the hardware and banned the operating system needed to run it at specification. They have the gun, the trigger is illegal, and they call that a religious vocation. Case File 1. The Unnamed Existence Erasing Weapon. Verdict: deliberately vague. During the War of Beasts in the opening years of M42, a dark angel named Aravane operated a weapon without precedent in anything the Imperium had deployed in recorded history. Aravane is identified across the available sources as the weapon's only known operator. One character, one documented use, one account of what it actually did in the field. Aravane used it against mind-controlled crewmen. The weapon was subsequently captured by Dark Angel's Fallen and then by a figure named Abdon the Spoiler. After that sequence, it stopped appearing in Dark Angel's publications. No codex entry, no follow-up novel, no FAQ acknowledgement. Absence. Games Workshop never officially named this weapon. The research confirms this across every available source. No codex, no Black Library novel, no White Dwarf article, no Warhammer community publication has assigned it a designation. The community term, ontological weapon, is a categorical descriptor, not a GW name. Ontology is the philosophical study of what it means for something to exist. The weapon operates at that level. It doesn't damage the target. It revokes the target's membership in the category of things that have ever existed. The community coined the term. GW only ever called it an unnamed piece of Dark Age archeotech. That absence of naming isn't peripheral information. GW introduced a concept whose mechanism involves erasing identity from the record, and declined to give it an identity in return. The weapon that removes names has no name. That structural symmetry could be coincidence. The investigation proceeds on the assumption that patterns don't require intent to be patterns. The philosophical weight of the mechanism deserves direct examination because the narrative problem it creates is specific and severe. If the weapon doesn't merely kill, but asserts into causality that the target never existed, the effect propagates in every direction from the moment of deployment. Every memory of the target is erased. Every record goes blank. Every image contains only empty space. Every consequence the target caused is redistributed to other causes in the historical record. This isn't science fiction with an unusually large yield. This is a premise that directly challenges the setting's ability to maintain narrative continuity, because the weapon removes the conditions under which narrative continuity about its targets is possible, in either direction, past or future, remembered or anticipated. For the Warhammer 40,000 setting specifically, the implications are structural, not just philosophical. Named villains survive across multiple codexes and multiple Black Library novels because the setting requires their survival. Abaddon the Despoiler requires 13 Black Crusades over 10 millennia to establish his canonical weight. A returning demon Primarch requires a cosmological return arc that anchors an entire narrative direction. These entities persist across decades of publication because GW invested in that persistence. An existence-erasing weapon doesn't threaten them the way a las cannon does. It removes the conditions under which their significance exists. Deploy it against Abaddon, and there were no Black Crusades. There was no Long War. There may have been no Eye of Terror. The narrative debt this weapon creates goes far beyond power scaling. It's a matter of whether GW can write any subsequent Dark Angel story without explaining why the chapter's one known existence-erasing weapon wasn't pointed at whatever problem the story is trying to make dramatic. The Dark Angels have one defining purpose in M41 and M42, hunting the fallen. The Dark Angels who sided with Luther during the destruction of Caliban were scattered through time and space, and the chapter has spent 10,000 years capturing them, trying to force each one to repent their betrayal of the Emperor and the Lion. This hunt is the source of the Unforgiven label, the reason the chapter maintains extraordinary secrecy, the thematic core of every Dark Angel's narrative. The existence-erasing weapon makes that hunt trivially resolvable. Locate a fallen, deploy the weapon. The fallen never existed. The sin that created them never occurred. The 10,000-year mission retroactively succeeds by erasing the problem. GW would need to address this immediately in any subsequent publication. The solution GW chose was to stop publishing material about the weapon. The weapon's factional origin adds another unresolved layer. Two positions appear in the lore and point in different directions without resolution. One framing describes it as a human-made Dark Age development, archeotech from the Golden Age, recovered and placed in Dark Angel's armories. Another connects ontological weaponry to the Necrons and their conflicts during the War in Heaven, the catastrophic struggle between the Necrons and the Old Ones, millions of years before the Dark Age began. If the weapon is Necron in origin, the Dark Angels acquired it rather than inheriting it from human DAoT development. GW has never addressed which framing is correct. Both exist in the available lore. Neither has been designated canonical over the other. This is consistent with GW's unreliable narrator framework for 40K canon. Conflicting accounts can coexist, but it also means the weapon has no settled identity of any kind. No official name, no confirmed origin, no current edition acknowledgement. What GW has committed to, in official publication, is the Dark Angel's specific and documented status as custodians of the Imperium's most dangerous technology. The fandom wiki's Lion L. Johnson article, drawing from canon biographical material, describes the Emperor's intentions for the First Legion explicitly. Lion L. Johnson was to be the bearer of weapons too terrible to entrust to any other. That phrasing is the canonical foundation for the Dark Angel's exceptional armory. Whatever the existence-erasing weapon's origin, the Dark Angel's possession of extreme Dark Age material is established in primary sources, not community inference. The 6th edition Codex Dark Angels, published in 2012, provides the most specific official documentation. The Dark Talon gunship's entry states directly that the aircraft does not just drop ordnance. It delivers an archaic holdover from the age of technology. The Rift Cannon, which tears holes in physical reality, and the Stasis Bomb, which freezes targets outside the flow of time, both are designated Age of Technology artifacts in rules text, in an edition current codex, with explicit DAoT attribution. This wasn't background flavor. This was a rules legal unit with Age of Technology weapons in an official GW publication. The Dark Angel's Armory Lexicanum entry includes, among other weapons, a designation worth noting: Vortex Weapon, Heresy Era. The parenthetical era designation signals that some extreme weapons are formally marked as period-specific and not current in GW's own cataloging. There is a mechanism for flagging weapons as era-bound. The unnamed existence-erasing weapon never received that designation, or any designation. The Heresy Era label exists. The unnamed weapon simply has no label at all. The Watchers in the Dark complete the picture around the unnamed weapon without confirming the specific detail the community most wants confirmed. These small, silent, hooded figures, native to Caliban, now inhabiting the Rock, are described in the fandom wiki as bearing ancient artifacts into battle at their side. Their Wargear entry identifies them carrying perfidious relics of the Unforgiven, ancient relics of the Ist Legion that have been recaptured by the Deathwing, whose exact nature or function is described as unknown. They carry unnamed objects of unspecified function. They come and go through areas of the Rock the Dark Angels themselves can't access. They carried the wounded Lion L. Johnson from the destruction of Caliban. The Lexicanum adds that these silent creatures have been known to carry Dark Angels' weapons to battle and seem to be immune to all acts of violence. Whatever they carry, conventional harm doesn't reach them. The community's extrapolation that a Watcher might carry the unnamed existence-erasing weapon, ferrying it to battle like a trophy or a ward, is reasonable inference from all of this. No primary publication connects the Watchers specifically to the unnamed weapon. The connection is fan interpretation, and naming it as such matters in a video this audience will fact-check. What the interpretation captures accurately is the absurdist distance between the weapon's implied capability and the chapter's apparent relationship with it. Something that erases existence, curated in a display case while a chapter prosecutes a 10,000-year vendetta by conventional means. The community's nickname, the Lion's Holy Nerf Gun, names that gap with appropriate dryness. The most powerful weapon imaginable, held by the most secretive chapter in existence, deployed once against minor targets and never again. GW introduced something so consequential that using it properly would break the narrative, and the solution was to stop using it. Case 1. Verdict: deliberately vague. The weapon isn't officially retconned. No GW source explicitly contradicts or removes it from canon. No Legends designation exists. No FAQ addresses it. It occupies the space between extant concept and forgotten introduction, in a setting where GW's canon policy ensures nothing is ever officially erased, just allowed to stop receiving development. No 9th or 10th edition Dark Angels publication references the unnamed weapon. The weapon that removes things from the record has been quietly removed from the record. That is either a coincidence or the kind of dry editorial joke that requires 45 minutes of lore archaeology to fully appreciate. The Adeptus Mechanicus's institutional failure as inheritor of DAoT knowledge is the thread running through every case that follows. The post-heresy Adeptus Mechanicus runs on a paradox so fundamental it barely registers as one anymore. Most Dark Age technology required artificial intelligence to function at design specification. The Men of Iron administered entire colony worlds. The Castigator Titan required no human crew. The Tabula Myriad managed information systems of a scale the 41st millennium can't replicate. All of it ran on Silica animus, self-aware artificial minds. The Crimson Accords of Mars placed a death sentence on any remaining Silica animus and banned development of new ones in the immediate aftermath of the cybernetic revolt. The Adeptus Mechanicus preserved the hardware and destroyed the legal basis for running it at specification. They have the artifacts. The minds that would operate them at full capability are an executable offense. The Quora discussion on AdMech tech heresy captures the practical result. Belisarius Call, the Archmagos responsible for designing the Primaris Marines, is technically a heretic. He created artificial intelligences, modified STC templates, and committed crimes against Mechanicus doctrine across 10,000 years of unauthorized work. He gets away with it because the Imperium needs what he made. The system is broken enough that the most prolific tech heretic in Imperial history is also the most important engineer in Imperial history. These facts coexist. Case File 2. The Castigator Class Titan, Father of Titans. Verdict: deliberately vague. The Castigator appeared in a single source, Dark Adeptus by Ben Counter, a Black Library novel set during the Horus Heresy era. The Castigator's dimensions exceeded an Imperator-class Emperor Titan. For context, the Titan fandom wiki places Imperator-class height at up to 150 meters, with the Warlord class, the most common battle Titan, at approximately 32 meters. Every Titan classification in active service is measured against the Imperator as the ceiling of known capability. The Castigator exceeded that ceiling. It described itself, supported by an STC database found alongside it, as the original Titan, the first ever constructed, from which all subsequent patterns were derived. The later designs were, by its own account, crude and incomplete copies produced by the ancient Mechanicum, working from degraded data without understanding what they were rebuilding. What made the design genuinely irreducible wasn't scale, but operating principle. Every Imperial Titan in service requires a princeps, a human being merged into the machine's mind through neural interface, spending years or decades in mental union with a god machine, often psychologically altered beyond recovery by the bond. The Castigator required no one. Its artificial general intelligence, a Silica animus, one of the prohibited category of self-aware machines, assessed tactical situations independently, executed responses without human input, and moved with what the fandom wiki calls impossibly graceful movement for something larger than the heaviest class of Imperial war engine. It thought for itself. What the Castigator represents, structurally, is the setting's broader condition made legible, a DAoT artifact introduced in a single novel and not developed in any subsequent publication. If the associated STC database had survived, the Adeptus Mechanicus would hold blueprints for a fully autonomous Titan. No princeps, no crew, no bond training, no decades of neural interface acclimatization. Titan legions are built around the assumption that the human-machine bond is structurally required for this category of weapon. The entire institutional apparatus, the ranks of moderati, the years of princeps training, the psychological toll of long bond service, the hierarchies of the Collegia Titanica, assumes no Titan can operate without that human interface. An intact Castigator STC makes every one of those assumptions obsolete the moment it exists as a reproducible blueprint. but reproducing it requires building a Silica animus, which is what the Crimson Accords of Mars prohibit absolutely. The choice the setting would force, if the STC were accessible: build the most capable war machine ever designed and commit the most serious tech heresy in Imperial doctrine, or leave the blueprint in a vault while the Imperium fights for survival across every front simultaneously. That story has genuine tension. GW introduced the concept within a single novel and hasn't returned to it. Verdict: deliberately vague. The Castigator is real and canonical. Lexicanum, fandom wiki, primary Black Library novel. It does not exist as a developing story element. The Father of Titans appeared once in a Horus Heresy-era novel and hasn't been revisited. Case File 3: The Men of Iron. Verdict: contradicted and softened. The Men of Iron created the cybernetic revolt. The Fandom Wiki Age of Technology article describes the weapons deployed during the conflict with specificity that the rest of the DAoT catalog rarely matches. Mechanivores, described as massive thinking machines capable of lifting entire continents and ripping open chasms on planetary surfaces that extended down to the world's core, which could also absorb space-time itself as a form of data. Sun snuffers, which uncoiled into great structures in the void, larger than the rings of Saturn, and were designed to devour the stars themselves. And omniphages, swarms of intelligent, microscopic nanomachines that could consume everything across the surface of a world in only solar hours. These are the weapons the Men of Iron deployed against humanity during the revolt. The Lexicanum's Dark Age article, citing the 6th edition rulebook, notes the conflict was eventually won by an alliance of galactic powers, some of whom may not have been human. The identities of those powers aren't recorded in any source this investigation accessed. After the revolt, artificial intelligence was outlawed. That edict, per the Lexicanum article sourced to the 3rd edition rulebook, remains in effect even to this day. The Men of Iron weren't just defeated, they were designated the permanent institutional justification for why humanity can't have the technology that might save it. In M42, one confirmed Man of Iron survives in active canon. UR-025 appears in the Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress material and the short story Man of Iron by Guy Haley, the latter cited directly in the Fandom Wiki Age of Technology sources list. That citation is unambiguous. The title is Man of Iron. The author is Guy Haley. It's primary Black Library fiction. UR-025 is real canon, a genuine Silica animus from the DAoT period, still operational in M41, operating under deep cover in a derelict space station. Its existence isn't community speculation. It's published, citable, confirmed fiction. And then, 1. The category that deployed continent-lifting machines, star-devouring structures, and planet-consuming nanomachine swarms. That category's representation in M42 canon is a single specimen operating cautiously in a specialty game supplement, its capabilities carefully undemonstrated. The described capability ceiling of the cybernetic revolt versus the single surviving exemplar in Blackstone Fortress is a gap large enough to constitute its own argument. The original lore presented the Men of Iron as a threat that nearly ended human civilization even at the height of humanity's DAoT power. The current canon represents that threat category through one ancient machine keeping a very low profile. Verdict: contradicted and softened. The Men of Iron, as described at peak DAoT capacity, were civilization-ending weapons. As represented in current canon through UR-025, they are a historical curiosity with operational capability carefully withheld from demonstration. The raw capability has been scaled to what the setting can accommodate without destabilizing ongoing narratives. Case File 4: The Silica Animus and the Tabula Myriad. Verdict: still canon, capabilities deliberately withheld. The Silica Animus hasn't faded from canon. The Lexicanum article defines it as a piece of technology forbidden within the Imperium that involves the creation of an artificial mind. The fandom wiki states that it's now considered one of the greatest crimes in Imperial space to develop an artificially intelligent thinking machine. The prohibition is active Imperium doctrine. The concept is referenced in current edition material. The Lexicanum article was, as of recent retrieval, still flagged as being created or revised, an unintentional piece of editorial irony in a video about ideas that remain officially present but incompletely documented. The Silica animus persists in the setting primarily as a boundary marker. It exists to define what the Imperium can't do, can't tolerate, can't risk. The concept's function in current canon is almost entirely prohibitive. The reason AI can't be created, the reason certain machines can't be repaired properly, the reason the Adeptus Mechanicus treats its most advanced technology as religious mystery rather than engineering problem. What Silica animus entities actually accomplished at full capability during the Dark Age, what they understood about themselves, how they experienced consciousness, what the galaxy looked like when millions of them administered human civilization, is kept deliberately opaque. The threat is invoked constantly. The perspective is never given. The tabula myriad sits adjacent. Note the canonical name, tabula myriad, not tabulum. The distinction matters in a video this audience will fact-check. The fandom wiki describes it as an advanced artificial general intelligence or abominable intelligence in the parlance of the ancient mechanicum of Mars. A confirmed DAoT era Silica animus in current canon. Community accounts of its Black Library appearance describe an AI that forgot its own history so completely it had to be persuaded of its own identity. An artificial mind that experienced total amnesia about what it had been, reconstructed into something new because the original version had been lost even to itself. The tabula myriad forgot what it was. UR025 survived by keeping a very low profile for 10,000 years. Every DAoT-era artificial mind the setting has introduced in recent publications carries the same trait. It has lost knowledge of itself, and the lesser civilization that inherited its era must tell it what it once was. GW keeps producing this variation without appearing to consciously develop it as a thematic direction. Verdict: still canon, capabilities deliberately narrow. The concept is active, the demonstrated capability remains minimal. The Silica animus exists as prohibition and cautionary tale, not as an explored entity with a perspective on its own 10,000-year absence from history. Case File 5. The Dark Talon's Age of Technology Attribution. Verdict: quietly removed, the attribution, not the weapons. The 6th edition Codex Dark Angels, published in 2012, contains this text in the Dark Talon entry. The aircraft does not just drop ordnance, it delivers an archaic holdover from the age of technology. 2 weapons are specified. The Rift Cannon tears holes in physical reality. The Stasis Bomb freezes targets outside the flow of time. Both are designated Age of Technology artifacts in rules text in an edition current codex. This wasn't background flavor. These were rules-legal weapons in a deployable unit with explicit DAoT attribution in official print. The 10th edition Dark Angels Faction Pack, in official GW PDF, describes the chapter's oldest weapons as follows. The eldest relic weapons of the Dark Angels trace their lineage to ancient Caliban. Ancient Caliban isn't the age of technology. The Fandom Wiki's Lion L. Johnson article establishes what Caliban was during Lion L. Johnson's era. The Knights of the Order maintained a few aspects of Caliban's ancient technology from before the Age of Strife. Bolt pistols and simple power armor handed down between generations. Knights riding to war on horseback on a death world covered in monster-infested forests. The Emperor arrived on Caliban in 846 M30. Caliban's ancient technology was, by that point, whatever had survived the Age of Strife, the 5,000-year barbaric interregnum that followed the DAoT's collapse around M25. The gap between ancient Caliban lineage and Age of Technology artifact is 5,000 years of civilizational regression and everything that implies about what those weapons actually were. The shift in attribution between the 2012 Codex and the 10th edition faction pack is documented in primary sources. No FAQ explains it. No Warhammer community post acknowledges it. The 2012 text exists in a published codex. The 10th edition faction pack does not preserve the Age of Technology framing. Verdict: quietly removed. The DAoT attribution that made the Dark Talon's weapons explicitly Golden Age artifacts in official rules text has been de-emphasized, replaced with a softer formulation that carries less specific implication about what those weapons are and where they came from. 5 cases. 1. Existence-erasing weapon gone missing. 1 autonomous god machine introduced in a single novel and not revisited. 1 civilization-level threat reduced to a single specimen operating undercover. 1 prohibited concept kept as boundary marker rather than explored entity. 1 explicit codex attribution softened between editions without acknowledgement. The individual verdicts span a range: deliberately vague again, contradicted and softened, still canon but narrow, quietly removed. The aggregate has a shape. There is no documented GW editorial decision to contain DAoT lore. No design meeting notes, no developer interview, no Warhammer community post acknowledges a deliberate policy of walking back powerful Dark Age concepts. What exists is a set of institutional mechanisms that produce these outcomes without requiring any specific decision. The primary mechanism is GW's stated canon policy, summarized in community discussion as "everything is canon, not everything is true." Conflicting accounts coexist under an in-universe, unreliable narrator framework rather than requiring arbitration. This is a reasonable approach to managing a shared universe written by hundreds of authors across 4 decades of publication. But it has a specific practical consequence. Nothing is ever officially non-canon, because GW never officially retracts anything. Undeveloped material sediments into background, and in a universe this large, background is functionally infinite. The concept doesn't vanish. It waits, technically extant, in a space large enough that waiting is indistinguishable from being gone. The Warhammer Legends program, introduced in 2019, handles a different kind of retirement. Units designated as Legends receive free downloadable rules, remain technically playable in casual settings, but are removed from official tournament rosters and receive no further updates. The Warhammer community post announcing the program describes it this way. Dubbed Warhammer Legends, these precious assets aren't part of their army's regular rosters, but can still be deployed using the downloadable rules below. Named, documented, with explicit policy. But Legends applies to rules, not to lore. A unit moved to Legends retains its narrative history unchanged. The unnamed existence-erasing weapon has no Legends designation because it has no rules entry. It's a lore concept. Lore concepts have no named retirement process. They stop being referenced, which in practice produces the same outcome as removal while generating none of the community response that an official removal would produce. February 2025 provides a documented comparison point. A revision to the Eldar Wraithbone concept generated community backlash, Reddit threads, and widespread documented notice. A visible lore change that was contested, processed, and responded to by the audience. That is what an explicit GW lore change looks like when it's visible. The unnamed weapon's departure from active canon generated none of that, because there was nothing explicit to contest. The Lexicanum article on the Dark Imperium novel series offers a parallel note on how visible GW lore revision works. In 2021, Black Library retconned and revised certain aspects of the novels, including setting the events to roughly 012.m42, as well as adding events from the Dawn of Fire series. That revision is documented, dated, acknowledged. The unnamed weapon situation is the inverse. No documentation, no date, no acknowledgement. just absence. The strongest objection to everything in this case file is worth addressing directly. The DAoT is deliberately kept vague as a world-building principle, not an editorial failure. A mysterious golden age that can't be fully recovered is more thematically resonant than a documented one. The tragedy of the Imperium, that it is the barbaric heir of something it can't understand, requires that something to be genuinely unknowable. If GW developed every introduced DAoT concept into a full story arc, the mystery would evaporate, along with the weight of the loss. This is a defensible position. The counter to it's narrower and more specific. The argument here isn't that GW should have developed the DAoT comprehensively. The argument is that GW introduced specific individuated concepts, a named operator using a specific weapon in a specific M42 conflict, a named Titan class in a named Horus Heresy novel, a specific surviving man of iron in a specific game supplement, and declined to develop any of them after introduction. These weren't left vague from the start. They were introduced with names, sources, and narrative specificity, then allowed to stop mattering. Planned mystery is designed before the introduction. This pattern looks more like introduction followed by retreat. The Emerald Testament's framing, suppressed in the lore and cited to a document the Imperium doesn't want read, connects both amnesias this investigation has been tracing. Humanity built tools to make its dreams real. The dreams were the darkest things in creation. The weapons that fulfilled those dreams, the ones that erased existence from the record, the ones that devoured stars, the ones that cracked physical reality, ended the age that produced them. The Imperium inherited the physical residue and lacked the capacity to use it. The Adeptus Mechanicus preys over machines it can't maintain at design specification. The star maps contain blank spaces where human worlds used to be. The knowledge lives in suppressed documents, in archival fragments too incomplete to reconstruct, in the vaults of an organization that treats engineering understanding as a theological threat. Across roughly 3 decades of editions, GW has introduced specific DAoT concepts into active canon with apparent intention. An existence-erasing weapon used once by a named operator in M42 material, an autonomous AI titan introduced in a single Horus Heresy-era novel and not developed further. A surviving man of iron present in current game material but confined to a specialty supplement. An artificial general intelligence with confirmed current canon presence but no demonstrated capability. A 2012 Codex entry with explicit DAoT attribution that the 10th edition faction pack quietly declines to preserve. Each of those was introduced. Each stopped receiving development. GW's canon framework means none were officially removed. They simply stopped appearing in a universe large enough to make that functionally equivalent to removal. The hardware is still technically in the lore. The understanding of why it once mattered is going quiet. What the Imperium did to its technological history over millennia of accumulated institutional amnesia, GW appears to have done to its most interesting DAoT ideas over several edition cycles. Nobody decreed either outcome. Things stopped being developed. And in a universe this large, undeveloped things become background. And background is where ideas wait indefinitely. Every verdict in this investigation is calibrated to the available evidence, and every verdict carries the same caveat. Absence of development isn't identical to deliberate removal. An inferred pattern of outcomes isn't the same thing as a documented editorial decision. The unnamed weapon may surface in a future Dark Angels publication. The Castigator's lore may become relevant to a story that hasn't been written yet. UR-025 may be developed into something proportional to what the Men of Iron once represented in lore. GW's silence on these concepts isn't confirmation they're gone. It's confirmation they haven't been developed. And the distance between those two positions is exactly what makes DAoT lore the most actively investigated territory in 40K fandom. The community catalog threads, the DAoT compilations, the space battle source threads, the r/40k lore deep dives into confirmed DAoT references exist because demand for this material consistently outpaces supply. The audience that built those threads knows every case this investigation covered and knows the cases it missed. Names of weapons in old white dwarf issues, lore entries from discontinued supplements, black library references that appeared once and weren't followed up. If you know of a specific DAoT concept introduced in a codex, a novel, a white dwarf issue, an old supplement that follows this same pattern, name it, give the source, give the edition. The cases that belong in this file but aren't here yet are the evidence this investigation hasn't processed. The final point is about what that work represents. The Imperium's tragedy in the lore is that it forgot. The greatest human civilization in history ended in catastrophe, and the survivors spent 10,000 years in the ruins, losing the ability to understand what they were living inside. Suppressed documents, archived fragments, machines without the minds needed to run them. The Adeptus Mechanicus in the ruins of the DAoT, preserving by ritual what it can't maintain by understanding. The audience tracking these citations, arguing sources, building community threads around DAoT technology references. That work is doing something the Imperium's institutions can't, maintaining the record, keeping the concepts in memory, refusing to let the absence become official. Subscribe for more case files.